Philip was born around the year 204 CE in the Roman province of Arabia Petraea, a region that included parts of modern-day Syria, Jordan, and northern Arabia. His birthplace is believed to have been the town of Shaba, a settlement south of Damascus. Later in life, when he had risen to the highest position in the empire, Philip would honor this town by renaming it Philippopolis, a reminder of both his pride in his origins and his desire to connect his personal story with the prestige of Rome. His father, Julius Marinus, was not a senator or a wealthy Italian noble, but rather a man of provincial Arab background. Though not much is known about his exact status, it is thought that the family was reasonably well off and had connections with local leadership. Importantly, Philip and his family were Roman citizens, a privilege extended to most free men across the empire by Emperor Caracalla in 212 CE. This meant that though he was born far from Rome itself, he grew up under the same laws and with many of the same rights as men from Italy or Gaul. Arabia Petraea was a frontier province, both Roman and yet tied closely to the deserts beyond. Its people were accustomed to trade, military service, and constant negotiation between urban civilization and tribal life. Growing up in this environment shaped Philip. He was not part of the old Roman elite, but he understood resilience, survival, and the importance of loyalty in a world where political power shifted quickly. These were the qualities that would later help him navigate the dangerous years of the 3rd century crisis. Like many ambitious provincials, Philip sought a career in the Roman army and administration. The 3rd century was a time when military ability often mattered more than aristocratic birth. Rome faced constant threats: Germanic tribes pushing against the Rhine and Danube, rebellions within the provinces, and above all, the growing strength of the Sassanid Persian Empire in the east. Men who proved themselves in service could rise rapidly. Philip seems to have entered the imperial bureaucracy and military during the reign of Emperor Gordian III, who came to power as a teenager in 238 CE after a series of violent struggles. Philip's earliest positions are not well documented, but sources suggest he served as an officer in the Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers stationed in Rome who were both protectors and kingmakers. The Guard often determined who lived and who died among emperors, and serving within its ranks gave Philip direct access to the corridors of power. By the year 243 E, during Rome's war against the Persians, Philip had risen high enough to be appointed Praetorian Prefect, one of the most influential positions in the empire. This appointment was a turning point in his life, for it placed him directly beside the young Emperor Gordian III during a critical military campaign. The war against Persia had been raging for several years. The new Sassanid dynasty, led by Shapur I, sought to reclaim former Achaemenid lands and challenge Roman dominance in the east. The Roman army, under Gordian III and his generals, pushed into Mesopotamia. Early victories encouraged optimism, but the campaign was dangerous, with long supply lines and the constant risk of betrayal among Roman officers. As Praetorian Prefect, Philip became one of Gordian's closest advisors, controlling access to the emperor and influencing the army's loyalty. In 244 CE, tragedy struck. During a battle near Mizek in Mesopotamia, Gordian III died. Ancient sources disagree on the cause. Some claim he was killed in battle, others that he was murdered in a conspiracy, and some suggest he died due to an accident or illness. What is clear is that Philip was present and benefited immediately from the emperor's death. He was proclaimed emperor by the army, a common occurrence during the 3rd century crisis, when soldiers often chose leaders from among their generals. Philip's rise from an Arab provincial town to the throne of Rome was complete. Becoming emperor was one thing, keeping the throne was another. Philip faced the immediate challenge of securing peace with the Persians. Shapur I claimed victory and even boasted of erecting a monument recording the Roman defeat to stabilize the situation. Philip negotiated a peace treaty that included paying a large sum of gold as tribute. While some Romans saw this as dishonorable, Philip's decision was pragmatic. The empire was overstretched, and continuing the war could have destroyed his fragile position. By agreeing to peace, Philip ensured the army could return safely, and he could establish himself as emperor without the shadow of a catastrophic defeat. When Philip returned to Rome, he presented himself not as a usurper, but as the legitimate emperor. He emphasized continuity, portraying Gordian's death as an unfortunate accident and his own succession as the will of the army and the gods. He deified Gordian III, allowing him to be worshipped as a god, which helped soothe supporters of the young emperor. Philip also brought with him immense wealth from the eastern provinces, some of it gained through negotiation, some through looting, and some through heavy taxation. This money allowed him to distribute donatives to the soldiers, a crucial step in securing their loyalty. At home, Philip faced the daunting task of ruling during one of the most unstable periods in Roman history. The 3rd century crisis was marked by constant threats, invasions, plagues, economic collapse, and civil wars. Philip sought stability through both traditional Roman values and his own reforms. He promoted himself as a restorer of peace and prosperity, even taking the title Restitutor Orbis, the restorer of the world. To the Senate, he showed respect, understanding that cooperation with Rome's political class could help legitimize his reign. To the provinces, he promised relief from excessive taxation, though in practice, financial troubles remained severe. One of the most remarkable events during Philip's reign occurred in the year 248 CE. Rome celebrated its 1000th anniversary, marking a millennium since the legendary founding of the city by Romulus in 753 BCE. The celebrations were extravagant, including games, spectacles, and ceremonies that echoed Rome's glorious past. Philip positioned himself at the center of these festivities, presenting himself as the emperor chosen by fate to preside over such a momentous occasion. Coins were struck commemorating the 1000th year, and the symbolism was clear. Philip wanted to be remembered as the ruler who guided Rome into its new age. Despite these efforts, Philip's reign was plagued by challenges. The empire's frontiers were under constant pressure. Along the Danube, Germanic tribes launched invasions, testing the strength of Rome's defenses. In the east, while peace had been made with Persia, tensions remained high, and Chaperai was far from defeated. Within the provinces, local revolts broke out, often led by ambitious generals who saw themselves as potential emperors. This was the curse of the 3rd century. The empire was too vast, its military too fragmented, and loyalty too uncertain for any emperor to rule without constant threats of usurpation. Philip also struggled with the empire's economy. The coinage was debased, inflation was rampant, and the financial burdens of maintaining the army and funding public spectacles drained the treasury. His decision to pay tribute to Persia, though practical, was seen by some as a humiliation that highlighted Rome's declining strength. To maintain order, he had to balance the demands of soldiers, senators, and provincial populations, each pulling him in different directions. Another intriguing aspect of Philip's reign is the later Christian tradition that he may have been the first Christian emperor, decades before Constantine. Some Christian writers, such as Eusebius, claimed that Philip was sympathetic to the new faith and even sought to join Christian worship during Easter. While these stories cannot be confirmed and may have been exaggerated to provide Christianity with a noble imperial patron, they reflect the rumors and debates surrounding his character. Whether or not Philip was truly a Christian, the very existence of these stories suggests he was remembered as a more tolerant ruler than many of his predecessors. Philip's background as an Arab also made him unique in Roman history. While many emperors came from the provinces, few came from such a distant and culturally distinct region. His ascent demonstrated the openness of Rome at the time, where provincial leaders could rise to the highest office if they had the ambition and military support. For some Romans, however, Philip's origins may have been a point of suspicion or prejudice, especially in an age when ethnic and cultural differences were often magnified by political rivalry. The greatest threat to Philip's rule, however, came not from outside the empire, but from within. In the provinces, generals began to rebel. In Moesia and Pannonia, along the Danube frontier, the legions proclaimed a commander named Decius as emperor. Decius was an experienced soldier and administrator, and he quickly gained support. Civil war became inevitable. For Philip, this was a familiar pattern. Emperors rose and fell by the sword, and now it was his turn to defend his claim against a rival chosen by the army. By the year 249 CE, the confrontation between Philip and Decius came to a head. Philip marched north to meet his challenger, bringing with him the loyalty of troops still faithful to him. At Verona in northern Italy, the two forces clashed. The battle was decisive, and Philip was defeated. Ancient sources suggest that he may have been killed during the battle itself or executed by his own soldiers once the outcome was clear. His young son, Philip II, who had been named co-emperor, was also killed, ensuring that no trace of the dynasty remained. The victor, Decius, was hailed as emperor, continuing the cycle of rise and fall that defined the century. Philip's reign had lasted only 5 years, from 244 to 249 CE. In the grand scheme of Roman history, it was brief, yet it left behind lasting impressions. He had been the first emperor from Arabia, a man who rose from provincial origins to the throne of the world's greatest empire. He presided over Rome's 1000th anniversary, a moment of symbolic importance. He attempted to bring peace, however fragile, and was remembered by some as a ruler with sympathy for new religious movements. At the same time, he faced rebellion, economic crisis, and military challenges that proved too great for him to overcome. His hometown of Shaba, renamed Philippopolis, was filled with Roman-style buildings during his reign, including a forum, temples, and baths. Though much of it lies in ruins today, it stands as a testament to his pride in his heritage and his desire to bring Roman civilization to the land of his birth. Even in death, Philip's legacy endured, both in the physical monuments of his reign and in the debates about his character and beliefs. The story of Philip the Arab is not simply one of power and defeat, but of a man caught in the whirlwind of an empire in crisis. His rise illustrates the opportunities available in Rome's vast, multicultural world. His fall reflects the instability of an age when emperors were made and unmade by the will of the army. He remains a symbol of Rome's diversity and of the challenges faced by any leader in a time of great turmoil. His life and reign remind us that history is often written not by the long-reigning rulers, but by those who, however briefly, held the fate of an empire in their hands. Philip's final years as emperor unfolded against the backdrop of unrelenting instability, a reality that had become the defining feature of the Roman world in the 3rd century. He had come to power with the support of the army and sustained his rule through a combination of ceremony, propaganda, and pragmatic decisions, but the underlying pressures of empire were too great for any one man to master. By 247 and 248 CE, cracks in Philip's authority began to widen. In various provinces, ambitious generals declared themselves emperors, seizing upon local dissatisfaction and the perception that Rome's leadership was weak. Each usurpation was both a personal challenge to Philip and a symptom of the larger sickness afflicting the empire, when power depended on military loyalty rather than stable institutions. Every frontier commander was a potential rival for the throne. These revolts did not always last long. Some were quickly suppressed, while others faded when their leaders were killed by their own men. But the repeated outbreaks of rebellion drained Philip's resources and undermined the confidence of his subjects in his ability to maintain order. The image of the restorer of the world, so carefully crafted in coins and monuments, was increasingly difficult to reconcile with the reality of a fractured empire. The celebration of Rome's 1000th anniversary in 248 CE had temporarily masked the instability, presenting the emperor as the guardian of the city's eternal destiny. Yet even as lions and elephants were slaughtered in the arenas and gladiators fought before cheering crowds, the legions on the frontiers were restless. To them, Rome's ceremonies mattered less than pay, food, and the security of their provinces. Along the Danube, in particular, tribes pressed forward with increasing boldness. Germanic peoples and Carpi raiders launched incursions into Roman territory, forcing the army into constant defensive campaigns. It was in this volatile environment that the general Decius rose to prominence. A skilled commander with long experience on the frontier, Decius was respected by his troops and admired for his discipline. When Philip sent him to restore order in the Danubian provinces, the legions there proclaimed him emperor. The proclamation was not merely an act of rebellion, but a statement of dissatisfaction with Philip's leadership. For soldiers on the frontier, far from Rome's pageantry, what mattered was the presence of a capable general who shared their hardships. In Decius, they saw such a man, while Philip, sitting in Rome and celebrating anniversaries, seemed distant and disconnected from their reality. The declaration of Decius as emperor in 249 CE forced Philip into a situation that had defined so many of his predecessors: civil war. He could not ignore the challenge, for to leave Decius unopposed would be to invite further rebellion and reveal weakness. At the same time, Rome could ill afford another internal conflict while facing external threats. Nevertheless, the logic of the 3rd century crisis was inescapable. Only one man could rule Rome, and that man had to command the loyalty of the army. Philip gathered his forces and marched north to confront Decius. His son, a younger Philip who had been elevated as co-emperor, remained in Rome under the watch of the Praetorian Guard. The empire as fate now hung on the outcome of a single clash between rival generals and their armies. The confrontation came at Verona in northern Italy. Details of the battle are sparse, for the ancient sources are brief and often contradictory. But what is certain is that Philip's forces were defeated. Whether through superior strategy, stronger morale, or simple chance, Decius's army emerged victorious. Philip himself was killed, either cut down in the fighting or executed afterward by his own men when they saw the battle was lost. His son, left vulnerable in Rome, was quickly murdered by the Praetorians. In a matter of days, the dynasty Philip had attempted to build the image of a stable imperial household with a wife and heir was destroyed, swept away by the brutal realities of power in a fractured empire. The death of Philip in 249 CE marked yet another turn in the relentless cycle of the 3rd century crisis. Emperors rose and fell with dizzying speed, their reigns measured in months or years, each toppled by a rival general or betrayed by their own troops. For Philip, the fall was particularly stark, for he had presided over one of the most symbolically significant events in Roman history, the millennium celebration, and for a time seemed to embody the possibility of continuity amidst chaos. Yet his reign, like those of so many others, ended in blood on the battlefield. To his enemies, Philip's fall was justice, the deserved fate of an emperor who had failed to protect the empire. To his supporters, it was a tragedy, the loss of a ruler who had sought peace and stability, but was undone by the relentless tides of crisis. For the empire as a whole, it was another reminder that no man, no matter his skill or intentions, could easily master the spiraling challenges of the age. The memory of Philip, however, did not vanish with his death. His hometown of Shaba, renamed Philippopolis, continued to bear the architectural imprint of his reign. Roman-style forums, temples, and baths were constructed there during his time as emperor, transforming the provincial town into a miniature reflection of Rome itself. These buildings were more than vanity projects. They were Philip's attempt to connect his local origins with the universal prestige of the empire, to inscribe his name into the stone of both his native land and the Eternal City. Though Philippopolis declined after his death, its ruins still stand as testimony to his ambition and pride. Even in failure, Philip left behind physical traces that outlasted his short rule. In the centuries that followed, Philip's reign acquired an additional layer of legend, particularly in the writings of early Christians. Some claim that Philip was himself a Christian, making him the first Christian emperor long before Constantine. According to one tradition, he sought to join the Easter service, but was asked by a bishop to confess his sins before entering, an anecdote that portrays him as humble and penitent. Other writers suggested he showed unusual tolerance toward Christians, refraining from the persecutions that had marked other reigns. The truth of these claims is uncertain. The official duties of a Roman emperor included performing sacrifices to the traditional gods, and there is no clear evidence that Philip abandoned these practices. Yet the persistence of the Christian tradition about him reveals how his image was shaped after his death. For Christians, eager to trace their faith's acceptance back to the imperial throne, Philip served as a convenient precursor to Constantine, a symbol of the faith's growing influence even in the 3rd century. Whether fact or myth, the idea of Philip as a Christian emperor ensured that his memory remained alive in ways that surpassed many of his contemporaries. Historians today see Philip as a figure caught between worlds. He was a provincial of Arab origin who rose to the highest office of Rome, demonstrating the empire's openness to talent beyond Italy. He was an emperor who sought peace with Persia not through endless war, but through negotiation, an act some called weakness, but others might interpret as pragmatic statesmanship. He was a ruler who emphasized family and dynasty in an age when emperors often ruled alone, suggesting a desire for continuity beyond the battlefield. Yet he was also a victim of the structural force that doomed so many emperors of the 3rd century: the financial collapse of the empire, the endless demands of the army, the instability of the frontiers, and the constant threat of rival generals. In this sense, Philip was neither a great savior nor a catastrophic failure, but rather a man whose reign illustrates the impossible position of Roman emperors during the crisis of the 3rd century. The story of Philip the Arab is thus both personal and symbolic. Personally, it is the story of a man born in a small Arab town who rose, through ambition and service, to rule the greatest empire of his age. Symbolically, it is the story of Rome itself in crisis, an empire struggling to maintain unity as internal divisions and external threats pulled it apart. His reign was short, his achievements modest, and his end violent. But within those 5 years lie many of the defining themes of Roman history in the mid-3rd century. The fragility of power, the importance of military loyalty, the use of propaganda to mask weakness, and the persistent hope that stability could be restored even as chaos deepened. Philip's reign invites us to consider not only the man himself, but the world he inhabited, a world where emperors were made and unmade by the sword, and where the survival of Rome hung in the balance with every passing year. In the end, Philip's legacy is a paradox. He was remembered for peace with Persia, yet killed in civil war. He was celebrated as restorer of the world, yet unable to prevent rebellion in the provinces. He presided over the most glorious anniversary in Rome's history, yet perished in obscurity on the battlefield. He may or may not have been a Christian, but he was remembered by Christians as one of their own. His hometown bore his name, yet his dynasty vanished with him. To some, this makes him an insignificant figure, one more casualty in a century of turmoil. To others, it makes him a symbol of resilience, a man who tried, however briefly, to steady the empire against overwhelming odds. The ruins of Philippopolis, the coins struck in his honor, the stories told by later generations, all these fragments ensure that Philip the Arab, though defeated, was not forgotten. He remains part of the tapestry of Rome's long history, a reminder of both the fragility of human ambition and the enduring power of memory. Philip's reign was shaped by the delicate balance between authority and fragility. Having risen to the throne through the army's support after the death of Gordian III, He understood that survival as emperor depended on more than battlefield victories. He had to convince Rome that his rule was legitimate, that he was not merely another opportunist thrust into power by chance. To achieve this, Philip cultivated a public image that emphasized respect for tradition, loyalty to Rome's institutions, and his role as a stabilizer of the empire in a time of chaos. One of his first and most symbolic acts was the deification of Gordian III, the young emperor under whom he had served and whose death created the opportunity for his own rise. By ensuring that Gordian was honored as a god, Philip distanced himself from accusations of treachery and murder, while also showing piety toward Roman customs. Monuments were erected, coins were minted with Gordian's divine image, and Philip himself appeared as a humble successor, chosen by the gods to carry on the sacred burden of rule. This act, while seemingly ceremonial, was in truth a masterstroke of political theater, for it reassured the Senate, soothed the army's doubts, and presented the emperor as more than a soldier's choice. He was Rome's rightful leader in a sacred continuum of power. Philip knew that personal legitimacy was not enough. He needed to anchor his reign in the stability of family. He elevated his wife, Ottocilea Severa, to Augusta, giving her the full honors of an empress and placing her alongside him in coins, ceremonies, and public imagery. By emphasizing the role of a respected wife and mother, Philip tapped into the Roman ideal of dynastic continuity, evoking memories of families like the Antonines, who had once presided over Rome's golden age. Even more importantly, he raised his young son, also named Philip, to the rank of Caesar and later Augustus, making him co-emperor. In doing so, he attempted to secure the throne through hereditary succession rather than military force. Dynastic imagery filled Rome. Coins depicted the boy emperor with his parents. Temples honored the imperial family, and citizens were encouraged to see the Philips not as a temporary stopgap, but as the founders of a new ruling household. It was a bold attempt to turn a soldier emperor into the head of a dynasty, and for a while it seemed as if Philip had succeeded. Yet while Philip carefully crafted his domestic image, the empire around him was disintegrating under the weight of crisis. Along the frontiers, the Rhine and Danube tribes pressed forward in raids and invasions, sensing the weakness of Rome as emperor after emperor rose and fell in quick succession. In the east, Shapur I of Persia, though momentarily checked by the peace treaty Philip signed in 244 CE, remained a constant danger. To the south, in Africa, local revolts threatened Rome's grain supply, a lifeline that sustained the population of the capital. Inside Italy itself, discontent brewed as citizens and soldiers bore the crushing burdens of taxation, inflation, and unstable currency. The denarius, once the proud silver coin of the empire, had been debased again and again by successive emperors eager to pay off their armies. By Philip's time, it had lost much of its value, and inflation was rampant. To keep the loyalty of soldiers, Philip distributed donatives funded by heavy taxation, but this angered the provincial populations. It was a cycle that none of the emperors of the 3rd century could escape. The army had to be paid to preserve power, but the cost of paying the army eroded the empire as economic foundations and drove provinces into revolt. Despite these immense pressures, Philip attempted to portray his reign as one of peace and renewal. He adopted the title Restitutor Orbis, or Restorer of the World, a claim that he had returned stability to the Roman people. The most spectacular expression of this came in 248 CE, when Rome celebrated its 1000th anniversary. The founding of the city, traditionally dated to 753 BCE, gave Philip a unique opportunity to link himself with Rome's sacred destiny. The celebrations were vast and impressive, consisting of gladiatorial games, animal hunts, public spectacles, and religious ceremonies. Exotic animals from across the empire were brought to Rome to die in the arenas: hippos, lions, leopards, elephants, all symbols of the empire's reach. Philip sat in the center of this magnificent festival, presenting himself as the emperor chosen by fate to preside over Rome's transition into its second millennium. Coins were issued to mark the event, depicting temples, founders, and Philip himself as the guardian of Rome's eternal destiny. The celebrations were not merely entertainment, but propaganda on the grandest scale, aimed at convincing the people and the Senate that Philip was the rightful protector of Rome's past and future. For a time, the symbolism worked. The city rejoiced, and Philip basked in the aura of Rome's longevity. But beneath the spectacle, the structural weaknesses of the empire remained unresolved, and the momentary joy of the millennium could not hide the realities of crisis. As emperor, Philip also faced the question of religion, and it is here that his reign takes on an intriguing layer of mystery. Later Christian writers such as Eusebius claimed that Philip was the first Christian emperor decades before Constantine. According to these accounts, Philip showed sympathy to Christianity and even sought to participate in Easter celebrations, though he was allegedly asked by a bishop to confess his sins before joining. While the historical truth of these stories remains doubtful, their very existence points to a perception that Philip was more tolerant or sympathetic to Christians than other emperors. At the very least, there is no record of Philip launching any significant persecution of Christians, which marked a departure from some of his predecessors. Whether he was personally Christian or simply pragmatic in his tolerance, the tradition of Philip as a Christian emperor endured in memory. For Christians writing in later centuries, his reign served as a symbolic precursor to the eventual conversion of Constantine and the empire itself. For Philip, however, any association with Christianity would have been politically delicate, since the majority of Rome still adhered to traditional paganism, and emperors were expected to serve as the chief priests of Rome's ancient gods. While Philip's propaganda painted him as a stabilizer and peacemaker, the empire's fragile political order soon revealed its cracks. In the provinces, ambitious generals saw opportunities to claim the throne for themselves. Revolts broke out in Mysia, in Syria, and in other regions where local commanders proclaimed themselves emperors. Each rebellion forced Philip to react, sending troops, making concessions, or crushing rivals through force. The pattern of the 3rd century crisis repeated itself. The vast empire, stretched thin and reliant on personal loyalty, produced new claimants whenever weakness appeared in the center. Philip's greatest challenge came from the Danubian provinces, where a respected commander named Decius was proclaimed emperor by the legions. Decius was an experienced soldier, admired by his men, and unlike many usurpers, he enjoyed widespread support. For Philip, this was the most dangerous threat he had yet faced, for Decius was not a distant pretender, but a capable general leading Rome's own legions against him. The final years of Philip's reign were consumed by this looming confrontation. As reports reached Rome of Decius's growing strength, Philip prepared for war. He still commanded loyalty among some troops, and his position as emperor gave him access to resources, but the tide was turning against him. By 249 CE, the two forces met at Verona in northern Italy. The battle was decisive. Philip's army was defeated, and he himself perished, either killed in combat or executed by his own soldiers when it became clear that the battle was lost. His son, Philip II, who had been elevated as co-emperor, was also killed soon after, bringing an abrupt and violent end to Philip's attempt to establish a dynasty. Decius emerged victorious and was hailed as the new emperor, continuing the cycle of military succession that defined the century. Philip's reign, once filled with grand promises and celebrated anniversaries, ended in the same way as so many others of his time, in blood and betrayal on the battlefield. Despite the brevity of his rule, Philip left behind a complex legacy. His reign illustrated the fragility of imperial power in an age of crisis, where legitimacy depended as much on propaganda and ceremony as on military success. He presided over Rome's 1000th anniversary, an event that etched his name into history, even if his rule soon collapsed. He attempted to build a dynasty, elevating his wife and son into positions of honor. Though the dynasty perished almost as soon as it was created, he made peace with Persia, which critics called dishonorable, but which was in truth a pragmatic necessity given the empire's overstretched resources. He left behind a memory of tolerance toward Christians, whether based in fact or later myth, that made him an unusual figure in Roman history. And he embodied the potential for provincial outsiders to rise to the very pinnacle of Roman power. A reminder that Rome's empire was as much a melting pot of cultures as it was a military machine. Even after his death, Philip's memory survived in the city of his birth, Shaba, which he had transformed into Philippopolis. There he commissioned Roman-style buildings, forums, temples, and baths, attempting to turn his hometown into a miniature Rome. Though the city's grandeur was short-lived and much of it lies in ruins, the remnants stand as testimony to Philip's pride in his origins and his ambition to link his local identity with the universal prestige of the empire. He may have reigned for only 5 years, but the stones of Philippopolis and the stories of a millennium celebration ensured that his name was not lost to history. His reign was neither a golden age nor a total disaster. It was a fragile moment of balance in a century defined by chaos. And Philip's attempt to steady Rome, however briefly, reflects both the resilience and the vulnerability of the empire he ruled. Don't split more than 100 seen.